Hello, everyone.
Go to zero button.
No.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. If you are online, we will be starting in maybe 2 or 3 minutes or so, just giving a few folks who are in person to come in and join us. But before we begin, we just want to make sure that you can hear us okay. So there is a Q&A box, should be in perhaps the bottom right corner of your screen. If you can put in the Q&A, just a yes or hello or a hi, just let us know you can hear us okay. And that you can see the screen okay as well for the slideshow. Good, awesome. All right, we will, I'm gonna go maybe double check. Okay, we'll start in just a few minutes then. Awesome. So much, Gwen. And then while we're waiting to begin, maybe if you are in the Q&A, if you're online and want to share where you're joining us from tonight, feel free to. We'd love to hear where you're from and maybe even how you heard about us tonight.
Don't mind my hobbling. I just got a bum leg today. And this is the only scripted stuff you're gonna hear all night, so that's on, just to be consistent, we've been using the same introduction for all these meetings, so. Greetings, good evening, my name is Tom Ballou. I'm the Air Quality Planning Manager at the Department of Environmental Quality's Air and Renewable Energy Division. I'd like to welcome you all here in person and virtually to this community outreach and listening session. The purpose of this meeting is to describe the process and schedule DEQ will use to develop a long-term statewide comprehensive climate action plan, or CCAP, and to get your input and feedback on what should be included in the plan to develop potential pathways to reduce climate pollution. This plan is being developed under a planning grant that was awarded to DEQ by the US EPA under the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, or CPRG. Since the award of this grant, the DEQ CPRG team has been very busy developing various deliverables of the grant. Our accomplishments to date have included the development of a short-term priority climate action plan, or PCAP, and applying for and securing 2 mitigation project implementation grants from EPA that will bring about $200 million to the Commonwealth. As we move into the CCAP development process, DEQ will be seeking input from a wide variety of interested parties, including the public, major stakeholders, state agencies, and other groups, both in the process and content of the plan. To this end, this is our latest in-person regional outreach effort. Thank you again for being here. We look forward to hearing your thoughts on both the process and plan to identify potential ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I'm going to now pass it on to Allison to continue the discussion.
Thank you, Tom, for that introduction. My name is Allison France. I am the quality planner here with DEQ, and I'll be walking us through a bit of what we're going to cover tonight. So in terms of today's agenda, we're going to go over all of our introductions. We're going to have a quick video for you, and then we're going to cover some of the meeting goals, what we hope to get out of why we're here tonight. We're going to go over a brief overview of the Priority Climate Action Plan, as was mentioned, before getting into the bulk of the content for this meeting, which is the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan. And then we'll sort of wrap up with a community discussion and group activity. We have a few discussion questions to guide you all through before wrapping up with some take-home materials and resources before we end the night. And then for all of our participants online, thank you so much for joining us this way. To navigate some of these options and to stay engaged with us throughout the evening, I'm going to direct you to a few tools that you can utilize. So the Q&A, some of you have already demonstrated that you are able to use it and that it works. So that's great. This is where you're going to be able to ask questions throughout the night, and we'll be monitoring that chat. And also when we have the discussion portion of the meeting, you can put in any comments or answers to those questions in the Q&A as well, and we'll be sure to answer those. If you are putting things in the Q&A, you might not be able to see somebody else's questions until we respond to them. So we'll be sure to either write in our responses in the chat or orally read out loud what people's comments and questions are so that everybody continues to stay engaged, whether you're virtual or online. And then for the chat, we have, that is a one-way communication between us and you online. And so we'll be sharing links throughout the night to relevant resources. And so you can be sure to monitor that as well. If you're having trouble hearing us, it might be on our end, so just let us know. We'll be monitoring this. But if you are just having trouble hearing, next to the unmute button, you can manage your audio and play with your different speakers to make sure that your sound is coming out where you need it to be. And if you have any questions about how to navigate any of this, please do let us know, and we're here for you. All right, and then just a few reminders before we begin. This is particularly for an in-person discussion, but you can feel free to ask questions anytime throughout the presentation, likewise for our virtual attendees. We do have designated portions for questions during and for breaks throughout the presentation, but this should be a free-flowing discussion. So if something pops up on a slide, please just feel free to interrupt and let us know. And then you can also, as always, write in Q&A. We'll have an open forum for discussion, but just be mindful of other people's time. We don't time your questions and your comments, so there's no 2-minute dinger that will go off. But just be mindful of everybody's time and be sure that we are continuing to flow the conversation and have everybody's voices heard as they're able to. And then if and when able, we have quite a close corners tonight, which is great. But for all of our people online to be able to hear a discussion, if and when you're able to just be sure to project your voice, but we'll be sure to repeat questions and comments to make sure that they are able to hear us as well. And then we'll kick it off with a little video.
Virginia has a clear and vested interest in cleaner air for all, reliable and affordable clean energy, and improved resilience from increased storms, floods, and a changing climate. The Virginia Department of Environmental Quality is taking steps to meet these challenges through a climate pollution reduction grant from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. This grant consists of 2 parts: climate action plan and implementation projects. In March 2024, the EQ released the Virginia Priority Climate Action Plan. This plan identified innovative and high-impact projects to reduce greenhouse gas emissions over 5 years. DEQ based the plan on the 2020 greenhouse gas inventory and input from Virginian communities, stakeholders, and the public. Now, as part of the second part in this process, DEQ will build off the shorter-term plan by developing a comprehensive climate action plan. This is a longer-term statewide plan that will identify and evaluate potential actions to further reduce greenhouse gas emissions over 25 years. This plan will also look at existing goals and requirements for reducing climate pollution. In July 2024, the EPA awarded Virginia almost $200 million worth of funding for projects to reduce methane emissions and enhance Virginia's natural habitats. Now you may ask, how does this impact me? Cleaner air is good for everyone. Reducing extreme climate impacts such as floods and storms also helps us have a better overall quality of life. Now, DEQ wants to hear from you. DEQ wants to understand how your community goals might align with efforts to reduce climate pollution by 2050. There are many sectors to consider when addressing climate pollution. Let's look at each one. Transportation, industry, electric power, buildings, waste and wastewater, agriculture, and forestry and natural lands. So, What are the climate pollution challenges in your community? And how can that information be used to develop solutions to help your community and communities across Virginia? You can share your thoughts on reducing climate pollution in Virginia through the updated DEQ Community Survey. Scan the QR code or visit this link to provide your input today. For more information on the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant and to view any upcoming events, visit deq.virginia.gov/CPRG or email our team at cprg@deq.virginia.gov. Let's work together to protect and improve air quality for the well-being of all Virginians.
Thanks. Hopefully that gave you a bit of an introduction as to why we're here tonight and some of the work that we've already undertaken through this climate planning process with DEQ. Don't want to watch it again, we'll move forward. But in terms of our meeting goals for tonight, ultimately, we're here tonight to gain local feedback on potential climate actions to be included in the development of Virginia's comprehensive climate action plan. We have many streams of input. We'll cover some of that process of what that input process looks like later on in the presentation. But this community-specific feedback will help us to identify the various opportunities, goals, barriers, and challenges to climate action in your community to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And we'll talk about greenhouse gas emissions as well, give an overview of what that looks like in our state as well. But all of this will be considered holistically when we're developing the plan that will be submitted to the Environmental Protection Agency in December of this year. And why we're even talking about climate action, if you're here and engaged with us, you might already be well aware of many of these benefits and feeling some of these yourself or passionate about them. But to just give you an overview of why we're talking about climate action and why climate planning is important in the first place is because there are a lot of tangible benefits to communities when we talk about this. Some things like improving public health and local air quality, protecting and restoring natural resources like green spaces or tree canopies in communities. Economic benefits like increasing the energy efficiency of residential and commercial buildings to save on energy bills, and then other economic benefits through expanding workforce development opportunities and accelerating the clean energy workforce throughout our state. And then we also often talk about transportation as a big one. So reducing emissions by increasing public transit options. And then I think when we talk about climate change, often the very first thing that comes to mind is reducing those risks from extreme weather. In Virginia, we see that with flooding and extreme heat. So those are just some ideas of why we're here and why this plan really matters. And now I'll pass it over to Ava Levine, our greenhouse gas inventory specialist, to share about the PCAP.
Also, are we blocking the screen for you? Fine, okay, I just want to make sure. Okay.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Allison. My name is Ava Levine, and I've been on our climate pollution reduction grant team for a year and a half as our greenhouse gas inventory specialist. I'll be giving a brief overview of our DEQ priority climate action plan results from our survey. During the PCAP, we engaged Virginia residents through various platforms, both online and in person. We developed a PCAP survey very similar to our current CCAP, Comprehensive Climate Action Plan survey. And we received 322 responses from 171 unique zip codes throughout the Commonwealth. From the valuable feedback we received, several climate action priorities emerged. Virginians expressed strong desire for more renewable energy sources used in their communities, more green spaces, and better public and active transportation. The respondents highlighted the most important benefits from these climate actions as being the improved air quality, transportation improvements, and community resiliency. The respondents did highlight the most important or the greatest barriers that prevented them from taking personal actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to be the high cost of energy efficient alternatives and limited access to transit alternatives. And finally, respondents felt the greatest opportunities for overcoming these barriers, like government incentives or policies, and my favorite, community unity. In the PCAP, we developed 10 priority measures aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I'll summarize these measures by sector by just giving an example for each sector. So for the transportation sector, vehicle electrification and use of low carbon fuels. For buildings, energy efficiency, energy efficiency improvements in homes, businesses, and institutions. For industry, use of low carbon materials in industrial processes. For the electric power sector, use of low emitting and reliable power sources. For the natural and working land sector, protection and restoration of forests, agricultural lands, wetlands, and other high carbon landscapes. And finally, for the waste and wastewater sector, capturing methane emissions from landfills and water treatment facilities. Now it's time to discuss the greenhouse gas inventory. Inventories are critical for any air quality plan because they provide that baseline understanding of where we are now to better inform us of what we have to do and where we have to get to. So Virginia's greenhouse gas inventories are developed using EPA's state inventory tool, and our greenhouse gas inventory encompasses all sectors and gases, greenhouse gases, including carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases. For the development of the inventory for use in the CCAP, 2021 was the most recent year that we could use from EPA's state inventory tool. And the emissions in this chart are all in terms of million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Yes,
Quick question.
yes, of course.
Where does landfill gas fall? Which category? Is it waste and wastewater?
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
What's
yes.
the difference between electric power and energy production?
Question. Energy production activities is fossil fuel energy production activities. So that's the emissions you get from coal mining activities, natural gas distribution, gathering and transmission, and oil and petroleum, also gathering, transmission and distribution.
And what's the electric power one?
And electric power is all of the electricity generated at power plants. Okay, so some key takeaways are in total in 2021, Virginia emitted about 146 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. We will be publishing a 2021 greenhouse gas full report that will go into subsectors and show some of these trends in further detail. These numbers are subject to change until that final report is out, but only very slightly as we've gotten some better data sources to use.
Is
Yes.
there a forward look on these categories? I would expect some of these categories to grow over the next few years.
That's a, yeah,
So-
yeah, just wait until you see the next slide. So transportation in Virginia is obviously our largest emitting sector. As you can see, it accounts for over a third of our Commonwealth's greenhouse gas emissions. And over half of these transportation emissions are actually from personal vehicle use. Electric power is the second most emitting factor in Virginia, which is the emissions from electricity generation. And industry is the third most emitting sector in Virginia, which reflects Virginia's industry-heavy landscape. Another important sector to note is the forestry and land use sinks. That's not on the graph, that is not on the chart, but in the table. And the sequestration from our forestry and land use actually offsets about a third of our total emissions. This really emphasizes the need to both protect our natural resources while also addressing those anthropogenic or human-caused emissions. And here are some preliminary emission projections. We are developing much more Virginia-specific projections under both a business as usual scenario and under different policy scenarios. But this is preliminary data on if we were to continue emitting in the same patterns that we have been, and if population growth patterns, economic growth patterns all stay as they are right now. But the 2005 to 2021 data, that is all of our DEQ greenhouse gas inventory data. So from 2005 to 2021, Virginia's net greenhouse gas emissions, which includes both greenhouse gas emissions and sinks, have decreased 26%.
Another question here.
Yes.
The lower categories, it looks like the upper ones are increasing, the lower ones are decreasing. Is that less agriculture, less forestry and local lands that's causing less in the future? What's causing that to diminish as a percentage of the total?
That is a great question. It completely depends on the sector we're talking about, because our projections were based on different sources for each sector. So I will have to look at the individual sectors, but I can follow up with you. Yes, of course. Yes.
One thing that occurs to me is what's going on with data centers. And so I look at the growth of data centers, and my first reaction when I looked at this chart is this can't be right.
Mhm.
And so unless we're assuming something like nuclear fusion or fission or something like that to provide all that power, although I think there's probably a significant power provided to data centers by solar, which is not long recognized because we don't know where the power comes from.
Mhm. Yes, so in our Virginia specific projections, we will be showing data centers as its own kind of toggle to see data centers at a high and medium load growth using different projections from JLARC and Dominion and PJM, yes.
On the topic of data centers, because they're so power hungry, I know that Virginia is a little bit unusual in that we import a lot of our power. Where is that power accounted for in other states, or is it accounted for under Virginia? How does that work?
Yes, so if you're talking about a national inventory, it may not be reflected in Virginia's portion, but for this exercise, we do reflect that end use, even though it's from other states. And that, yeah, we do that through a process of reapportioning the leftover emissions after you count the direct emissions and then reapportion those
And then it's
to the other
captured,
sectors.
it's captured in those sectors, the residential, industrial,
Gotcha.
commercial,
Yes, as well as in the electric.
and
gas
the
sector.
direct generation as well.
Yes. So yes, this will look very different, but we are very excited to present our projections when we publish our comprehensive climate action plan.
And we're probably gonna have some version of that Virginia-specific business as usual scenario with those policies added into it sometime next month. And we are, in addition to our public outreach that we're doing now, we have a stakeholder group that's ongoing. We have meetings with them. And all of the proceedings of that group are, including the presentations, are put on the website. So you'll be able, once that's done, you'll be able to see the progression from the default BAU to the more Virginia-specific BAU.
Another question, Tom, to that, or Eva, I'm not sure who to direct it. But will we have a chance to talk about public policy tonight and legislation? Is that in the purview that will impact these things?
It certainly is a topic of discussion. However, the plan is, the way we envision this plan right now is going to focus on what can be done to, what it needs to meet certain goals. And then what can be done to meet those goals, and what is needed to enable the ability to do those things that can achieve the goals. Because you hit on a point, and I think you'll probably not understand, much of the stuff we do or can't do is all determined by legal authority, statutory authority, and regulation to be able to implement all that. And one, you may know, Virginia regulatory, well, the legislative process can go quickly. But the regulatory process is very slow. It takes us usually a couple of years to develop regulations. So there's going to be an inherent lag time, if you will, between what we may recommend in this plan and actually getting things implemented on the ground.
We've got a bill that we've helped promulgate in Illinois that has taken their hierarchy, their waste hierarchy, and inserted a number 3 in it and moved incineration to power and incineration for reduction down 1 notch. And we put thermal conversion in right after recycling because it has so much benefit. Because we can take all the plastic.
Yeah.
We can do.
It's more efficient.
Much more efficient, and one of our byproducts is a huge supply of green electricity.
Mhm.
So, but that's a public policy home or something like that, that modifies the hierarchy
Okay.
and gives us policy guidance and an ability to go to the investors who would fund a plant like this and say, this is a priority for X state.
And the process you described earlier, and unfortunately, I like all you were privy to, it was an alternative way of dealing with waste going to landfills instead of letting them do what they do, cook and produce methane and other things, but to take them and turn them into beneficial uses.
Right.
And my response to that would be, we would certainly want to know about that process, and we would, to the extent we can, we would identify it as a possible measure or way to go about dealing with waste emissions.
I'll get you the Illinois bill as it's been drafted and submitted.
Yeah, that's really beyond just recommending kind of what ifs and possible reduction scenarios. That's kind of, we want to identify as many possible ways to get to the goals and that we need to get to.
Yes.
So I understand that Virginia has now become the #1 consumer of electricity of all the states now, largely because of the growth of data centers. But one of the things I fear is that as data centers continue to grow, they're going to be firing up more of the coal-fired power plants, although it's not clear to me because a lot of them switched over sold to natural gas that was cheaper. It's not clear to me how that dynamic's going to play out. I don't know if they can continue to use natural gas or if it's going to be more coal. And I was hoping that in your study, you can look at that question. And also I was curious about all this work is being funded by an EPA grant. And given the comments about doing away with the, I forget what the term used was, but doing away with the funding for these things, I do concerned about being able to continue with this work, which I think is great.
One thing on that point, Germany meets the EU clean air standards in producing electricity from coal. And the way they do it is they gasify it and create pure natural gas, synthetic natural gas, which is cleaner than a petroleum gas. And then they combust that to make power. There's no smokestack for the gasifier that breaks the coal into that product.
But do you see that for the future of the United States in the next 4 years?
The equipment's there. I mean,
It would cost more, that's my point, and so I think it's.
Yeah.
Yes, so for the different energy sources, we will be analyzing because we'll have to show in our projections, what it will take to achieve the Virginia Clean Economy Act standards of renewable energy sources. We'll show what it will take, to reach different goals and targets and, what the makeup of that energy will look like and what the implications of those energy sources may be. And for the federal funding question, as of right now, we are keeping on. We have access to our funds. We have been drawing down. So for right now, everything is looking good for now. We have a call with EPA on Friday, which is our first call in a month. So yeah, we're back on track.
We pretty much believe our little slice of the pie from IRA and some of these other large spending bills is pretty safe. And the other thing I would say about your other topic in terms of the future, what's a future fleet, generation fleet look like? We have some very smart people who are our consultants at ICF, if you're familiar with the term. They are pretty much leading experts in doing that kind of power sector modeling. And what it would take as an economic standpoint to meet those demands in light of the constraints or statutes that are there. So that's gonna be one of their main, efforts is to look at the power sector and try to predict what it will look like. To meet that large increase in demand, but also still meet, the reduction requirements that are out there as well.
Do we have any questions online, Julia?
I have a quick question.
Yes, hi Karen.
What is land use omission?
Yes, so it's land use change. So when forest land is converted to settlement land, or when, wetlands converted to settlement, and for, emissions from settlement soils, like nitrous oxide from settlement soils. I separated it out in that chart between the emissions and the sinks, but, in my inventory report, I will go into what those subsectors are, but I'll show them all together as, forestry and land use net emissions.
Okay.
Okay, well, there are no other questions. That concludes my portion of the presentation. So I'll pass it off to Julia to talk a little bit more about our comprehensive climate action plan. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here today. As Ava mentioned, my name is Julia. I am the Administrative Data Coordinator for the CPRD program. So, and thank you to Ava for giving us a very comprehensive overview of our inventory, which is really going to be the backbone of the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan. So the Priority Climate Action Plan was a 5-year plan that looked up until year 2030. And the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan, there are several distinctions between the priority versus what is required in the comprehensive plan. And there's actually on your handouts, there should be on page 3, a list of the difference of those requirements and just kind of a highlight to show what requirements are kind of different within this longer term plan. So DEQ is looking at creating a comprehensive plan for the state of Virginia, looking at multiple pathways to reduce climate pollution. And this plan is representative by using lots of sources of input from across the state to figure out what measures different members of the public and stakeholders would like to see within this plan. And then it is the responsibility of DEQ to take all of that input and look at how we could feasibly do that in a multitude of ways and create those policy suggestions along the way. So we will be using that emissions inventory to build out a Virginia-specific business as usual scenario. With that scenario, we will also be identifying reduction targets, and we will situate those potential strategies and reduction measures within those larger targets and those larger overarching themes of the plan. One other thing that Tom was mentioning is just kind of identifying exactly what authority would be needed to implement some of these measures. It will also look at what potential funding sources would be needed and what potential partnerships could be used to leverage the feasibility of some of the suggested measures and pathways towards reducing climate pollution. In addition, there will be several thorough analyses, one that looks at air quality and looks beyond carbon to look at other co-pollutants and how the reduction of climate pollution will help with ozone and levels of particulate matter and other pollutants that we see across the state and every other state. But there will also be a Virginia-specific workforce analysis. So looking at the future of clean energy jobs, what there currently is, where there are gaps, and what would be needed in order to fill those gaps to make that transition as just as it possibly can be. And in addition, there will be a community impacts analysis. So looking at exactly how we're taking in input from communities and how that input can be used to create measures that would reduce some of the barriers and the problems, and whether that be environmentally or related to accessibility that DEQ will be addressing within this plan in terms of reducing climate pollution. So as I mentioned, the Environmental Protection Agency is very intent on every climate action plan being very representative. So that includes looking at a lot of streams of input. So as you can see, those are just kind of laid out in a more general array. Oh, yes, sure.
Who is the stakeholder group?
It's a good question. So I was planning on just going through each individually. So right now, we're engaging the general public. We're doing that, through a multitude of ways. DEQ always accepts written comment via our CPRG email. In addition, we have a survey in which we collect written comment and feedback. We're also hosting in-person sessions as well as making those hybrid and having some virtual statewide sessions. So we're collecting general public feedback in that way. And in terms of our stakeholder group, basically the various stakeholders identified represent various economic organizations across the state of Virginia. So there are 34 organizations that were identified within that process, and each of those organizations designates a member to physically participate in that group. We do have on our website a published list of every stakeholder and every organization that is involved within that stakeholder group process. And on the next slide, I do kind of have a timeline that breaks down exactly how all of these streams of input are being implemented. But in addition, we are also conducting an interagency working group. So looking at other state organizations and seeing their interest in this plan, what they might be able to inform us about in terms of programs that they might be working on, whether it's related to health or agriculture or any of the various state organizations that will be involved in that work group, to identify what authority they have, what authority we have, their level of interest, and how we can come together and, like I said, try and make some of these measures more feasible. In addition, we're also working with localities, regional groups, and tribal nations. So there are also in Virginia 3 regional groups that received planning grants in addition to DEQ at the state level. That's also in our frequently asked questions. I think it's question 9. And that just kind of breaks down the amount of funding that DEQ received in addition to the other regional groups that received planning grants. So that was the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, Plan RVA, working in the Richmond area, Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, working closer towards the Eastern Shore. And then we also have the Monacan Indian Nation that received a planning grant. So we are working constantly with those regional groups to not overlap our engagement efforts and make sure that, you know, we're reflecting their boots on the ground work with communities and the input that we are receiving at a larger state level. In addition, we will be reaching out to the other state and federally recognized tribes that did not receive planning grants to see if they would be interested in providing their input for us on what they would like to see in the plan. And EPA has a particular focus on LIDACs, or low income and disadvantaged communities. So looking at spatial data and really figuring out where across the state there might be certain environmental harms and burdens such as urban heat density, flood risk, things of that nature, to identify those communities and engage with them meaningfully, make sure that we're providing accessible ways for them to give their input on our plan. Yes.
What does that look like? Do you think, I know you're not like there yet, but how are you planning to do that outreach and making it accessible?
Yeah, so I think ICF was mentioned. They're our main contractor and they've been helping us out with a lot of the planning work. But in addition, we also have 2 subcontractors, Flip and PRR, and they have a long history of working with communities and a lot of the areas that we've also identified through our spatial analyses. So not only did we do some preliminary analyses in the priority climate action plan, just on some of those environmental factors that I mentioned. EPA has a tool called EJ Screen and CGEST. So we were able to use some of their spatial data to do some of those preliminary analyses. But now that we have that additional subcontractor support, they are running their own analyses to kind of have us be able to come together, see what we found, and make sure that we're targeting our outreach efforts accordingly. So Flip in particular has experience working with communities. They have reentry programs for clean energy jobs. They work very well within the clean energy space and with outreach. So they have a good background there. So we're lucky to have their support on this outreach effort as well. So we're still in the process of identifying those communities. That particular mode of engagement has yet to begin, but I also, like in the next slide, we'll just break down a little bit of like the timeline and how we're moving through our engagement process throughout the spring. Yeah.
I know the solid waste portion office of DEQ is currently undergoing their statewide solid waste management planning efforts. Have you guys coordinated with them as far as like how that effort and this effort can tie together, especially with like the waste sector emissions? I guess in that regard.
That's a great question. I am not too familiar with some of the other divisions as I've been like a newer employee. But I'll definitely take note of that. I'm not sure if anyone else has any experience.
Data wise, I get all my data right from our solid waste team and their landfill data that they collect. And because we are working with our waste team on one of our implementation grants, we will be incorporating them into our plan
Right.
under the waste and wastewater sector.
And the only thing to add there is we also, not only do we use their current and historical data, waste data, we're also using their, to what the extent they have projections, going into the future.
So when you talk about projections on waste data, one of the things I thought about is like, I live in Fairfax County. And so one of the things they have is a plan to go to zero waste is a part of the program.
Mhm.
And so what they're looking to do is basically recycle as much as possible and get down to zero waste. So if that is done, I would imagine that's gonna have, hopefully a very positive impact on emissions. I mean, what's happening right now is they're burning the stuff, which I'm sure you know.
Yep.
And if we can recycle it instead, that would be great. But the thing that I wanted to raise to you is that things like this work when you're able to get mass and scale. And so getting other counties to do the same, and this would be a good opportunity for not only Monterey, but also for Ames.
Yeah, I think that would be something that we would look at in terms of, can you upscale or expand the geographic coverage of programs like that? As a possible strategy for the waste sector.
If you want something next,
But
give it to you.
Can I add a data point to that? I'm in Fairfax County as well. There are a few counties in this state that recycle more than 21%. Some places will claim 35% goes in the recycling bin, but a third of what goes in the recycling bin isn't really recyclable. Plastics 1, 2, and 5 are, 3, 4, and 6 and 7 are not, unless we put them through something like we do, because we can use all of that. We're all BTU driven. We don't need to separate those out. We can make a product out of those commingled. That's one of the issues that is a real important point for recycling. The other one is, a lot of people don't realize, is plastics 1, 2, and 5 have only a 3 or a 4 generation life cycle. And then they have to be put in a landfill or do something else with, because they become contaminated enough that they can no longer be manufactured back into a milk jug. Same with paper products. Paper products have a 5 or 6 generation. The end point frequently is the blow-in insulation in an attic that's wood fiber. But each time you pulp wood fiber, the fibers get shorter. And as they get shorter, there's less you can do with them. So ultimately, all of that recycling ends up in the landfill. The final home for all of those fibers, all of those molecules in today's world is in a landfill. And that's not a sustainable model in my mind.
Our recycling program at DEQ does report that, that we do recycle, I think it's either 43% or 46% of all of our, waste is actually recycled. So I don't know
In
exactly.
Virginia,
Yes, that's what they publish.
those are the statistics that are given to DEQ from the people who are doing that work.
And, we do have a,
Yeah.
Yes.
For like stress collection. But this discussion, again, to me, points out, again, one of the goals of our plans. In each sector, there are different paths you can go by to accomplish the same thing, or something
Right.
similar to it. So either what path, could be used together or in tandem to address that particular sector.
And we do have a question online. It's getting to what degree are you considering environmental justice concerns? Because waste incineration might decrease emissions, but may impose greater pollution burdens on local communities.
Perhaps Gwen might be
Yeah.
able to answer that. She's online.
Gwen is online. She's on our environmental justice staff. Hi, Gwen.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, how
Good
are
to
you?
be here.
Good to be here.
So I am the Northern Region Environmental Justice Coordinator. We have been working with the folks in our air planning region. We're working on CPRG to discuss environmental justice issues. Like they said, they do have a plan for outreach to low-income disadvantaged communities, which encompasses environmental justice communities as well. It certainly is a concern, and I think that the implementation of these plans will need to take into account the geographic location of where these projects are taking place. So I don't know. I think that they have a better idea about, where they are with that. I'm trying to think of the right word. Where they are with sort of the implementation. I think that that's still a little ways off. But it will certainly have to be part of the conversation.
Thank you,
Couple
Gwen.
things to that. First, the EPA requirements of these plans do require us to, when we look at our low income and disadvantaged communities, to do that analysis to show what level of benefits are going to those communities, either directly or indirectly, out of the plan and the measures in the plan. So that's part of that analysis we have to show. The other part of that is indirectly to what we're doing. You mentioned our implementation grants that we got from EPA. Both of those are almost specifically directed at low income and disadvantaged communities, because the methane one is, the main project there is coal mine methane capture and beneficial use. So almost all coal mines that we might use as project sites are going to be in low income disadvantaged community areas and bringing them benefits, but in terms of reduced emissions and hopefully other economic and other benefits. The thing I would say is we have a smaller program with our landfill folks to do the same. That's kind of why I was asking you about your particular processes, that we have a smaller amount to do pilot projects of methane capture in particular, and reuse of that and some beneficial use. But sounds like to me, you kind of go a step further and
Created.
so yes, so that's an interesting concept. We might want to talk with our folks about in more detail. So with both of those projects in that grant are specifically targeted and will bring benefits to those communities. I mean, we can't, for lack of a very better term, we can't really mess with the landmine, because it's really factored. It's much of Southwest. There are a number of LIDAC communities there. And the landfills were one of the top priorities, is to select projects that are in or near these areas as well.
Right.
And just to briefly add on, kind of echoing Gwen and Tom, but a priority focus of the way that this program was built was EPA really had an emphasis on Justice 40 requirements. So ensuring that 40% of the benefit of every implementable item is going towards low income and disadvantaged communities. And just making sure that we do everything to demonstrate exactly where those areas are, what the engagement process looked like going into that. And our subcontractors have really been helpful in the sense of providing support. They have done climate action plans before, they've done engagement plans before, specifically with environmental justice communities. So we are hopeful that we will be able to make that a priority of this plan and any implementation projects, as Tom mentioned. I'm gonna go ahead. See here. So, just to go over a brief timeline, to give a little bit more context to, the engagement plan. We had our kickoff, webinars in October, so, the priority plan was submitted to EPA in March of 2024. Yes, and then, we kicked off the comprehensive planning in October, informed the public, of this effort, and then we began our stakeholder group engagement in November, and that carried through December. And that allowed us,
Sorry,
sure,
what happens when this is to the EPA? Do they review it and give it feedback, or it's just a submission?
That's a good question. Rick, I don't think we know. PCAP, we did not get out. They said you're checking the box that you submitted the plan.
Okay.
And that it met all the criteria in their checklist that was supposed to go into that plan. They didn't have any formal feedback or written feedback. It's not something that they would approve like a traditional air quality plan. It's like a SIP for National Ambient Air Quality Standard. There's no approval process per se that these plans go through. Their main goal, reading between the lines, was to get people to talk, think, and do climate plan.
And with that being said, we will still have to get, Commonwealth administrative approval,
Right.
and review of the plan, but federally, not that we know of.
Who does that approval?
We'll be sending it up, through the Secretary's office, Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources, and then it may go higher for review.
They're probably go through governor's office review as well.
What's that?
When would that be?
Actually,
that leads me to my next slide. So we have our spring engagement plan, so we have lots of overlapping engagements right now, but, we're here. Thank you so much for being here at a community listening session. We're conducting our stakeholder group engagement through March, so we will be having our 4th meeting, and that will be our final meeting. We will be conducting regional group engagement. We actually had a call today with our MSAs that are also involved in the planning grant, and just hearing where they are at in the process and continuing that constant communication back and forth. And set to begin here, actually this week, we had our first interagency meeting, very exciting. And then we will, throughout the spring, conduct our LIDAC outreach as well as our tribal engagement.
It seems to be one national group that isn't there, and that's, maybe you're speaking more of universities. Yeah, several universities in Virginia that, have environmental degrees and programs, professors and students and things, so.
Yeah, so actually, go ahead.
I was just gonna mention that is, if you were gonna say the same thing, it's lumped sort of into our general public, more or less. That's part of our engagements. We've been gaining contacts and already have some contacts, or are also continuing to expand that list with universities and colleges throughout the Commonwealth. And right now, our priority engagement with them is to gain youth feedback on the survey and get that input. That is a category that's predominantly lacking from our survey right now. And then encouraging attendance at these types of public listening sessions. And then in terms of like their engagements and their climate work that they are doing, that discussion has yet to begin, but could be a beneficial part of this. But we also are doing the food waste. We can maybe talk about that a little bit with colleges and universities to have that part of the implementation. So if you wanted to touch on that.
Oh, I was just gonna bring up, our stakeholder group does have
Yes.
some university representation.
Yes, that's right.
We have representation from William and Mary and Virginia Tech on that group.
Yes.
Yes, William and Mary, Virginia Tech,
That's it.
That's yeah.
yes.
Just one other thing to add there is that there have been a number of universities already done a number of studies on, everything from power sector decarbonization to full economy-wide decarbonization. And that is going to be another one of our tasks of this exercise, is to catalog all of that and use that information, or at least again, identify it and use it to the extent we can in developing our plan. So they've got a lot of stuff. There's already a good deal of information. I don't want to single anybody out, but there is a great deal of info out there already. Another study that we may have talked about recent, since we all revert back to the data center discussion at some point, is JOIC recently did a study on data centers as well, which we have. We DEQ helped them put that study together, and we also have been able to get all their data and analyses that they went into their report that could inform our report as well.
Great question. Sure.
Any community colleges in that college mix? Yeah.
That's a part of our workforce development process as well. There are often workforce development centers, and then Flip, our subcontractor, has really strong working relationships with many, if I would, not going to say if all, but many community college workforce planning centers across the state.
Any other questions? So this is where we finished talking about engagement. This is where DEQ starts to just bring together all of the moving pieces and starts drafting the actual plan. So this summer, we will be, we have our survey open through the end of April, and we'll be continuing these engagements through the end of April. So around May timeframe, we'll begin drafting the first version of the plan. Once we internally draft that first version, we will be releasing it for an informal public comment period, doing some more engagements and getting a final round of feedback based on what we come up with. And then we will close our feedback window yet again, and go through all of those comments and do our best to implement that into the final plan that will undergo state review and then be submitted to the Environmental Protection Agency in December of this year.
And just one addition to that, since it came out of your question. After the draft plan is developed, we will have that first initial round of internal review going through the Secretary's office and wherever else it goes, before it goes out for public comment and review. Then we'll have another review. This is the same process we did in the PCAP. It will go through a final review, administrative review, before it's finally submitted, the final plan submitted to EPA.
All right. And I'll just pause one more time. Just want to make sure. If you have any questions about the engagement plan, please let me know. If you think of anything more generally related to differences between the comprehensive plan versus the priority plan, I'll be happy to answer those questions to the best of my ability as well. I'm not seeing anything online. Okay. Any other questions? Oh, sure.
So one more question is, I've read the JLAR data center study, and I thought generally it was very good. But I also think that there are some areas where it's weak. But generally, the information for the energy demands and so forth, as far as I can tell, that's a better part of the study. I think the water part of it, there's significant gaps. But the my question really is there's probably going to be updates and changes on information that's in the JLAR study that probably would be good to incorporate. And I'm just wondering, it kind of sounded like we were planning just to take the JLAR stuff and I just was wondering, is there going to be another step where you try to augment it with newer stuff? I just want
Yes, so we helped JLARC out a lot with the creation of the study, just with data. And so in turn, they have provided us with all of the underlying data for the study. So we will continue to monitor if that changes.
Yeah, there are a number of different things out there that none of them are really competing. They're showing kind of the same trends in terms of demand growth. We've got the JLARC study that really, much of the data came from the power generators, Dominion and let's see, Novec. But we also have PJM, if you're familiar with the interconnection, they do projections every year. We were up to the moment, I think probably in Ava's, that last slide, it was probably using the 2024 PJM data, but they now have 2025 data. And all that, and including the Dominion RFPs, if you're familiar with that. That terminology, integrated resource planning documents. They're all very much, all the demands are very much in line. There may be slight deviations, but not enough to really make a major change in our course in terms of trying to capture that. Because again, we do have a limited time frame. We gotta get this plan done and published and out the door by December 1. But The good news there is that there is a follow-up planning requirement that we have to submit a status report, implementation status report in 2027, which will give us another opportunity to revisit all of this stuff and see if we're still on the mark in terms of major assumptions and so, or if we need to revise it, if the plan needs to be revised more. And that's been our sort of our approach all along, is that that status report is really going to be a revisitation of the plan.
And maybe you're about to talk about this, but I still feel like I don't fully understand all of the pieces of the puzzle with like when this is implemented, how it interacts with all of the different like legislative bodies and like already existing policies and how it all, like where it goes from here once the plan exists.
Yeah, I will say one thing that we've kind of run into is that in terms of the regulations, the assumptions that we make in terms of what exactly will be in place, for example, 5 years from now or 10 years from now, we don't always know the answer to that. And that has a lot to do with what we're exploring. So what is already in place, for example, the Virginia Clean Economy Act? Can we basically build a scenario based on that being there, but also just be mindful of the fact that there are oftentimes regulatory changes that we don't always anticipate or know in advance. And I will say it's a bit of a complex topic to try and, just put all of this out there in terms of, okay, here's the priority plan, here's the comprehensive plan, here's implementation projects. It's a little bit confusing. And the way that the Environmental Protection Agency really geared this program was setting aside the majority of funds for high impact pollution reduction projects. Now anybody could apply to receive that grant funding. EPA was more comfortable kind of leveraging some of those projects with what partnerships are already in place. Is there a certain state that already has all of the regulatory bodies that regulatory authorities that they would need to be able to implement a specific project? Do they have all of their, I's dotted and T's crossed to basically be able to have this project? They just need the funding to be able to do it. So that's kind of where EPA focused a lot of their implementation funding. The planning funding is great as it offers it's non-competitive. So basically any state, any MSA, like planning organization, any territory or any tribal nation could opt into that funding, receive that financial support for creating plans. But, there's always some precarity with what authority will be in place in the future. But this plan really looks to identify where those gaps are. So for example, if there's a certain measure that we heard overwhelming support for and we think would be great, and we have these interested parties, but there's just X or Y components that are missing in terms of authoritarian perspective for us to really make this an actionable item. And then kind of, as Tom said, just creating pathways for future legislators to hopefully make some of these measures implementable. And then there's the implementation projects as a separate thing. So it does get a little bit confusing. But we hope to make feasible measures that could be implemented in the future. We know that these are suggestions, these are different pathways, they are not enforceable. But we hope to just lay the groundwork for, an administration that would want to take that legislative action to move some of this forward. I hope that answered your question. It was a little bit wordy, but yeah.
And you just realize again, even though we have more time than we did when we put the PCAP together, we are still time limited here. And anything we do is going to be a plan that's going to be submitted to you, done and submitted to EPA before next General Assembly session. So obviously, we're not going to be able to create statutory or regulatory things within that time frame. It's really more of a roadmap or that someone can get on and run with at some point.
With that, I think we'll move on to our next topic here. So we seem to be in a really good flow of discussion. Thank you all so much for being so engaging and asking so many really insightful questions. We're going to now stop sort of talking at you, and hopefully you guys can talk at us a little bit more and tell us what your thoughts are. So we have some key questions for you. These are questions that are framed in our survey and are sort of the bulk of what we are seeking public feedback on. and what we hope to identify as these community needs, opportunities, and concerns and barriers in different regions. So we're going to walk through a few of these questions, but because we have seen, you guys have a pretty good flow of conversation. If there's one question that really stands out to you more than another, we don't have to go in the 1, 2, 3 order. But for all of our participants online, we will walk through all of these questions. And if you just want to comment when you're responding to these questions, which one numbered that you're replying to, that'd be very helpful for us. But we'll start with question 1, just as to get us started, talking about which sectors are most important to you when reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We've heard a lot of this already with energy. Waste is a big topic as well. For everybody online as well, if you want to share, we have in our handout, you all have it pulled up, the different sectors with examples of emission reduction strategies within each sector. And we have that overview from the PCAP as well. So if you want to share a little bit more about perhaps why you're concerned about a specific sector or what that means to you, we're more than happy to hear that now. And then I will also mention, as well as we go through the rest of these questions, feel free to read them. If you need some time to jot down some notes about your answers to these questions, we can take some brainstorming time as well. Also, if you need to converse amongst one another for a little bit, we're happy to do that. Whatever function works best for you all tonight.
Well, everyone else is quiet, so I'll take.
Absolutely, get us started. That's amazing.
So, when I think about this question, the way I think about it is I like to look at what are the emissions and then ask the question, where is their potential? And the one that stands out, you've mentioned transportation. I mean, that's huge. And I am concerned that people don't appreciate, the benefits that we can have of converting to electric vehicles. If you look at what other states are doing, California, they're even talking about they're purchasing these large semi trucks and other things like that, going to the entire fleet. And so, I mean, it's happening other places. And it could happen here. The other thing is, one thing I don't see in this at all is the green building theme.
The green what?
Green building.
Buildings.
Green buildings. I mean, you could slice things up in different ways and you just slice them up here in different ways. It seems like that's a really significant area because you save energy and you save money and it just makes sense. You probably say that somewhere on your website. But those are, and I think packaging is very important, how you present this.
Oh, you said packaging, how we present it?
Yes, how do you present?
Oh, so concerned about packaging.
Yes.
Yeah, if you were talking about plastic, I just feel so guilty on it.
That is true.
Yeah.
That is true.
Both types of packaging. Yeah.
Jump in and support for that. I literally had written down, fleet electrification, right? Actual EV infrastructure, increasing, access in general. Actually, across the state, because I think there's a lot more pent up demand and curiosity for EV, but still range anxiety and if I live in a townhouse or apartment, how do I charge? Can I afford to, install a charger? Once you have a home charger, it's a game changer. Like, you don't really need to gas up much.
If the power is made from something other than coal. Well, if the power is made from coal, the electric car is not as efficient as the gasoline car that I drive.
Our power isn't 100% made from coal though, so.
It isn't, that's right, but
So
Dominion's
the
been fighting to get to 12% green, and they're not there yet.
So when people raise the power generation for electric isn't clean, like, I know, but I want to change that too. Right? So I get it. But the path is not to keep on doing what we're doing. It's to solve that other problem too, which is why when the question says which sectors, I wrote down all of them, wait. Care about all of them. Industry, like circularity, I think we sort of touched on that. And decarbonization, I know a lot of industries are actively doing this on their own, but I'm interested to know how that falls into the plan and the chart was really enlightening because, transportation and then electric generation. I think about coal and gas and how data centers are going to, you know, increase demand for all of that. But then forget about sort of driving over here and seeing about 1 million cars. Right?
Maybe that few.
Doing a lot.
50% is transportation, so, you know, public awareness. I personally feel, I'll pass the mic in probably 2 minutes, sorry. I think fleet electrification, as people start to see that, less maintenance costs and more industrial solutions, driving that at work, more people are gonna be like, you know what, this is actually pretty good. So I'll pass the microphone there.
Yeah, either.
Yeah, on the topic of transportation, not just fleet electrification, but taking into account how we're building our communities. And building, you know, having smart growth and building walkable and bikeable communities and communities that have access to transportation. And low income housing in those communities, like all of this is a beautiful like synergy in my mind to both lowering emissions and providing opportunities for people to live good lives in close knit communities and
Yeah, those urban planning themes, absolutely.
I'm struggling with this, and the reason I am, it feels to me like we're saying, what mineral is it that's essential to a healthy cell in the body? You can't define one. It's not just one mineral. If I had to put one rail for me, and part of the reason I got into this, what I'm doing now, I've got children and grandchildren nearly your age, grandchildren nearly your age. And unless we have a clean energy supply, I mean, the energy heats and cools those communities. The energy runs the cars, the energy manufactures the goods and services that we have. The energy produces the fertilizer that grows the crops that we grow. And there's a breakthrough there that if you've got time and want to be bored, I'll share with you later. But it seems to me that we've got to figure out a different way of driving an economy. And it's got to be a overarching process. It can't be do one thing here. And I mean, kind of some of your comments, it's got to be what Peter Senge talked. Are you familiar with the Fifth Discipline, the book, The Fifth Discipline? Right. If you want to read something really interesting that came from a mathematician and a musician at MIT that replaced Peter Drucker's thinking on management, read The Fifth Discipline. It talks about balancing and reinforcing feedback loops in the leadership chain, which is no different than what your body goes through. You've got managing and reinforcing, balancing and reinforcing feedback loops in your body, good and bad. And to me, that energy issue is so central that we've got to figure out why it is that we're taking the tops of mountains off in West Virginia to get 12 or 13,000 BTU per pound coal. And we're burying tires in a landfill that have the same BTU value. I mean, the carbon molecules on this rock that we live on are fixed, they're finite. There aren't any more. So it seems to me that we've got to figure out how do you repurpose, how do you disassemble, which is what we're trying to do. How do you take something that's waste apart into the two primary building blocks of anything organic, carbon monoxide and hydrogen, and then put them back together in a meaningful way so that instead of burying all of those BTUs in a landfill, you're burying the mineral content that was in those materials, like you carry out from a fireplace when you burn a piece of wood. What's left is the mineral content that was in the wood. If that's all that's left, then you've almost got a soil enhancement instead of the 5% to go back into the landfill. It seems to me we've got to basically change, and back to Senge, he he brought back a word that hadn't been used for 500 years. And it's metanoia. It's a Greek word, and he didn't want a word that had all of the baggage built onto it that we typically put on words. He wanted to bring one back that hadn't been used in 500 years. And it's a basic change of heart or change of will. And that's, seems to me, that's where we've got to get to. We've got to get to that point that if we know something exists, if we know we can do it, then the next step is, what will it take to put it on the ground?
Thank
How
you.
can we make it happen?
Yep.
I mean, the coal gasification in Germany, it's been done since 1908 when Fischer and Tropsch invented it. Sasol is making fuel in South Africa out of coal, gasifying coal. There's no smokestack in either of those cases.
Well, there have been attempts to do that here in this country too. They just have not fared very well,
Yes.
for whatever reason.
Well, here, energy has been so relatively inexpensive.
But, yes, that.
And so we haven't been pushed to do that. But in the meantime, we're loading all that carbon into the atmosphere, and those who disbelieve are saying it's not real, it's Mother Nature's cycle. And I say to, when I hear that, how many kids do you know who are suffering from respiratory issues? Is it better that we keep putting carbon in the atmosphere? If the answer to that is no, and I haven't found anybody yet who said the answer is yes, we should put more, then let's stop doing it.
Yeah.
And let's let the historians figure out whether it was a cycle, Mother Nature. But in the meantime, let's reduce the carbon that we're loading into the atmosphere. So
Yeah,
I
thank you for sharing. Yeah, no, I think
apologize for the sermon, but
yeah, it's helpful and it's all cycle. You know, as you can see, you can't really talk about one sector without talking about them all and the amount of incentives and public will it'll take to get tangible action. I'm going to read one comment online, and then I know you have a comment as well, so I'll direct that to you really quickly. Thank you all so much for your comments online. We are seeing smart growth and expanded opportunities for public transit are absolutely a must, yes. And on building electrification, there's a need for more options for renters who would love to get cleaner appliances and improve building efficiency or weatherization, even access to solar panels, but you can't because they don't own homes. So those renter barriers are absolutely real and hard for, to overcome when talking about reducing emissions, personal emissions. And then more standards or incentives for energy efficient upgrades and electric upgrades and multifamily housing and opportunities for community solar. Thank you for sharing. Yes.
Thank you. I agree with a lot of things that have been said. The sector that I focus more on is the transportation. I think that's the big one that everybody was saying. And like, as Ting had said, with the active transportation and all of those, having a concerted and intentional effort to help folks reduce vehicle miles travel is, I think, one of the big things. I think electrification is great, but we're still talking about single occupancy vehicles. So also focusing on how do we not only reduce the miles, but reduce the number of cars that are on the road. But it's also the maritime travel, the harbors are also huge emitters. And so what can we do to help lower the emissions there as well? It's not just the roads that are part of the transportation sector. And it appears as if efforts to kind of bring that sector, that portion of transportation into a more cleaner, less emissions is a little bit slower than everywhere else. The EV cars is that sexy thing that everybody wants, but we also have to look at the dirty grit part of the transportation piece. And I think that, the maritime part is. And then the only other thing I would say is, oh my goodness, my age is showing. There was one other thing. If it comes back to me, I'll raise my hand.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I should have written it down.
No, you're fine. Yes.
So you reminded me of something that drives me absolutely nuts. We talk about wanting to reduce vehicle miles traveled, but the way that we do land use is such that you have to have a vehicle pretty much, unless you have a really robust transportation system. My opinion is we should be having smart growth with high-density metro corridors. But one of the things that we really mess up badly is when we have high density, we listen to builders and we go cheap on construction. And your neighbors are, you know everything they're doing if you live in one of these. And it's a kind of place where if you have the resources, there's no way you're gonna wanna stay there. And so if we want people live in high density, they need to have the amenities that they're looking for. They need to be able to work close to where they live. They need to be able to live in a structure that is such that you're not gonna hear everything from your neighbors and are not burdened by so many inconveniences. You could charge your EV car or whatever. Well, we are not doing that. And I think that's a huge issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Housing equity is absolutely a big piece of this puzzle, for sure.
We see some of that in the town center concept. I mean, Reston started that, 40 years ago? And we're seeing crop up now down in Washington DC, near the Potomac. You've got some clusters of town centers where someone could live and almost walk anywhere they needed for anything they needed. And we're beginning to see an emergence of that sort of thing. But by and large in this country, the definition of mass transit is the mass in transit. It's not any organized system that gets people from point A to point B.
The Clarendon-Roslyn Metro Corridor is, I think, a good example.
I would also add in there that it's not just the new development that we need to make sure, but we've got a lot of housing stock, it's particularly the further east you go in Northern Virginia, where these older structures may not even be able to support solar panels or what have you, or have gone for years with this investment. So there has to be a way in which we can either upgrade or do some kind of community solar or something like that that can really support the older, higher density. And then when you go to the rural communities, you've got a lot of structures that have they're exactly the same way as they have been built in the 20s before they understood what insulation was. So there's a lot of retrofitting that can be done. The building codes, I think, Tim, I think you had mentioned the building codes. Some of those building codes don't even support the retrofitting that needs to be done. And so how do we make sure that when we're looking at new development, the existing housing infrastructure, even commercial buildings, are also able to do these upgrades?
Yeah.
It would be really interesting in the plan to see, for the roadmap and legislators, I change, what's the word, metanoia.
We're learning new vocabulary tonight. That's great.
Green building and land use, right? There are communities that are walkable, and I live in South Riding, and I gotta drive to the store, and I can walk to the school, but I have to drive everywhere. Also, like food access. I do not like to go to the city anymore. Right.
An idea.
Like the land of concrete, so integrating natural spaces and food production everywhere in the state, in all different communities. I've seen frequent cities in America where abandoned plots of land are being turned into community farms. More of that, please, right? And that creates the carbon sinks and less transportation of food, better health molecules for the system. Right?
Wonderful.
Go fresh.
Reducing parking minimums, plug for that.
Yeah. There's some of those that are in conflict with one another too. If you put solar panels on agricultural land, because it's flat and it's relatively inexpensive, you practically destroyed the ability of that land to ever produce agricultural products again.
I've seen mixed reports
If
on
you
that.
put
So there's
solar
integrated
panels
systems.
on agricultural land?
Yeah.
No, there's such a thing as agrivoltaics,
Yeah.
and there are ways to integrate grazing and as well as growing.
But if you're permanently covering up the land. That's the point under the solar panels is the issue that you completely eviscerate the microbial life in that soil.
Most solar farms are not, it's not like a blanket of solar panels. They're gonna be raised up. It's not like smothering the soil in that way.
Yeah, Julia actually is part of our renewable energy team, and she might be able to clarify the process of developing solar and agrivoltaics.
Yeah, I will say, we did do a field visit with some Virginia Tech folks that were doing some studies on agrivoltaics, and we were able to just see a utility scale solar facility, and part of the facility was on a deforested area, part of it was on a previously agricultural area. So they did lots of erosion tests. They're still in the process of doing lots of those measurements, but I will say I was very impressed when I saw that solar facility. The panels are rotating depending on where the sun is. So there are ways that you can build solar facilities that do account for the value of the soil and can maintain it as well.
And I will just add a quick note to that as well on the term like agrivoltaics. It is a possibility to either grow or graze on that land underneath the panels. When we did this site tour, the biggest thing was really just like implementation with things as simple as mowing or watering. And those were like pretty much the biggest barriers. But in terms of is it possible and can they grow? The answer is yes. And there have been success stories of that as well.
And I will also say, I'm not sure if you've heard of House Bill 206, but the renewable energy team at BQ has been working on, with regulators and the larger regulated community to, over the course of several years, it's been a little bit of a contentious topic, but to mitigate any negative impacts to agricultural soils as well as forested lands. Some of that is still kind of being debated what the final version of that regulation will look like. But there are lots of considerations of the natural conservation value of those lands and how certain mitigation measures can take into account for that.
Have you looked at all of the Rodale website? Are you familiar with the Rodale Institute
I am
in California?
no,
I would encourage you to look at their research.
How do you spell Rodale?
Rodale, I think. I think that's right. Their former CEO is a good friend of mine, and he has great concern about the ability of land after it's been under solar panels. And again, they move, I understand that, but they follow the sun, which means they're still sheltering the earth underneath from the sun that they're trying to collect energy from. So you're blanketing that land and taking the photosynthetic capability away from it because you're sheltering it from sunlight.
Yes, but I will say that it's not, at least the facility that we saw, the way that the panels rotate, the way that they're spaced also does not fully prevent, I can't speak.
Yeah, if they're spread out, that's a different matter, but some of them, the one that I go by frequently at the intersection of, what is it? 295 that goes around Richmond and 95 in that corner, there's looks like a 40 or 50 acre solar farm. But they're right next to each other, which creates a total blanket for the soil. And that's what I think Rodale has said causes them concern.
I'll definitely look into that. Thank you. And I also just briefly wanted to mention, there are states and I'm sure different areas within states that can also create programs that, you know, encourage like native plants or just like smarter practices, best practices on solar sites. Like for example, in Virginia, we have the Pollinator Smart Program, which is a partnership between the Department of Conservation and Recreation. So looking at kind of investing more in solar facilities at the forefront to reduce mowing costs and erosion concerns in the future and just promote land that is able to serve multiple purposes and is beneficial overall. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know what you had.
No, I have concerns that in Virginia, it feels as though there is often a lot of resistance to utility scale solar that is for some reason not matched by resistance to things like data centers and just like blanketing things in asphalt for all of our parking lots and like other things that, other kinds of development that like truly smother the soil and like completely cover it up. There seems like a big mismatch, there culturally and politically to me. So just putting that out there.
I think solar is really a great part of a bigger solution. I don't think it is the solution. I don't think anything
I don't
is,
think anyone.
Right.
Yeah. that it's, and the quality and the efficiency of those solar cells is increasing. It has in the last decade tremendously. Yeah.
Yeah, did you have a comment as well?
Yes, I was wondering, do you ever coordinate with the soil and water conservation districts? Because they have those kinds of programs as well that you just described in terms of, you know, I forgot already what you, no, I'm joking, but you know, mowing and all of those things, they have education courses for, and they work with, you know, farms and stuff like that in the more rural areas.
I believe I have heard some of those conversations within the renewable energy team. I will say, as I'm more of like an administrative, I help with their website, like I help with, you know, I definitely love learning more about the programs that they're involved in.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't be the right person to fully answer that question. I believe yes, but I'm not gonna say that with full confidence. But that is a question I would love to ask my team members and get back to you on.
Yeah, because they have funding to support those things too. They have grant, maybe not huge, but they can help support some of those activities through grants.
And there are communities across, or districts across the state. Okay.
Yeah, so there's like Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District is the one up here.
Okay.
They're kind of affiliated with the DCR.
DCR. Okay, wonderful. I'll read this comment online really quick and then I'll get to you. Just a really quick comment. Thank you again, Kara, or Kara, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. I think prioritizing solar on rooftops, brownfields, and over parking lots as a way to minimize impacts on agriculture. So thank you for contributing to that topic of conversation. Thank you. Yes.
So you raised the soil under the conservation district. So I'm friends with the chair of the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District. And one of the things that we have gone to different meetings and learning for is some, for example, we need some legislation on some of the things that are supporting this. But when it comes to solar, there is a concern that they're placing the solar farms, the utility scale ones, on agricultural lands and on forested areas. I think the reason they do that is because that's where the electrical connections are. And so if they could manage to place them in brownfields, that would be a whole lot better. And when it comes to animals, you have to have different standards when it comes to cows than you do for sheep. And goats are problematic because they like to jump up on things and poop on it. So you don't want goats. But, you know, I think all the talk about using you know, having multiple uses is absolutely true. But, you know, it's figuring these things out and getting people to put these farms where it makes the most sense. We should be putting out these large utility scale solar farms, but let's maybe be a little bit more sensitive to it, not just doing it where it's most economically advantageous.
Economically advantageous. I was a finance major and I was taught, you know, profit and loss. And how to make money, but it didn't capture the whole picture. It wasn't a holistic view in that word, Mednoia. I would like to position, you know, Virginia as a world leader in creating a clean economy and, you know, that creates jobs and access to healthy food and natural spaces. And like, that's the vision that we could probably get people to build around because it checks the boxes of things, but we have to have the courage to reimagine things a bit. And understand, you know, the impacts. So the legislation, the regulation matters because the people that are just looking at profit and loss and not doing impacts. And data centers are great for reducing property taxes in Loudoun County, but also drive more demand for energy across the state, right? People don't want solar in western counties, but all of your phones and all of your AIs right in my backyard. I've got 3 data centers within a 5-minute drive of my house, right? So we're all kind of in this together, but I think it's important just to raise awareness, looking at the holistic picture of things, and I think we're kind of having an awakening as a society there. I see a lot of industry decarbonizing and things like that. One other earlier point, green buildings, out of Richmond for an event earlier this year, and coming back, I stopped at a restaurant. I was charging, I was eating, and then on TV, they were talking about the new Virginia Tech campus in Arlington. Really cool innovations in solar, like solar window, like generating power, and then the sun shields or luminaires outside the building that collects power. So we need like all of that, and it'd be great to have standards or incentives for new building construction to adopt these technologies. Somebody's going to make money off that. So that's going to be good for tax revenue and jobs and things like that. But I think public needs to be a little more aware of that.
On that, and also kind of moving into like waste sector as an emitter is one of the things that as a bureau we struggle with in Arlington solid waste is the Dillon rule aspect that is the Commonwealth, and I think empowering communities through additional authorities to act on these things would be vastly beneficial to us in accomplishing a lot of these things. And so, with that, I know I had mentioned composting and food waste. That is a big one that we're trying to tackle now, and it touches on a lot of things, but it is all in behavior change and how we approach things. And I think that's one of the biggest obstacles that we face in doing anything that is environmentally or climate focused, is getting people to reset their mindset. The metanoia that you mentioned before is like, how do we get people to divert from the status quo? And I think waste is one of those where you just toss it and forget it, and you don't give 2 thoughts about what it took to produce, to throw away, what happens with it after you toss it away. But all of those things are things that vastly impact the amount of emissions that we generate as an individual and then as a state altogether.
11 years ago, the Sierra Club and World Watch put out a white paper called The Future of Green Energy. And their contention in that paper was that thermal conversion of waste was going to be the most environmentally safe and productive way of getting rid of it. And that can be done with food waste, anything carbon based. And it can all go in one hopper. It doesn't have to have 2 pickups. It doesn't have to have different method of handling.
I mean, so I will personally disagree with that methodology, because I always believe that there's a higher and more efficient use of resources that we have generated and created, and being able to use them as much as possible, and then maybe ultimately disposing of them through a incinerator or thermal disposal method is probably more ideal than burying it in the ground. But ultimately, I think source reduction is the biggest thing and the biggest impact that we can have, instead of just disposing of it and all of the different methods of the hierarchy.
I agree. Our patents will take 95% of what goes in a garbage can and make a product out of it.
Just +1 for composting. I think we should all be doing it. I feel like it's an undersung, like climate hero. And that we also need to think about like, not just the waste reduction, but like our soils are getting worse and worse as we use like what's now conventional agricultural practices, and we like rake up all our leaves and our long trimmings and all of this stuff. And composting is not just a way to divert waste from landfills, which is also super important. Especially because that's what creates the methane, right? The anaerobic cooking of stuff that's encased in plastic, that organic matter. But also to enrich our soils. Yeah, well, awesome.
I love that. Yes, and I love the term climate hero. I think it's climate positivity. I mean, a lot of this conversation, we often talk about these barriers. There are personal barriers, there's societal barriers, economy-wide barriers, but there are actual tangible actions that can be taken, happening already. And so often we don't really need to reinvent an entire wheel to get action done. So I love that.
Yeah.
That actually is a lot of our question too, about specific actions that are already being taken. So I did have a question on that. If anybody does compost, or has access to that either personally or at work, or are there composting facilities nearby that you're able to benefit from?
I do also want to briefly read this comment online because it directly relates to it.
Oh, great, yeah, awesome.
So food and organic waste can be composted, which is beneficial for soil and can even boost carbon sequestration. The city of Alexandria has a great pilot program for compost collection that could be replicated in other communities in Virginia.
Oh, that's awesome to hear. Thank you so much for sharing. Does anybody else have impact stories? Yeah.
So I do compost,
Great.
and Fairfax County will be composting all waste according to their plan.
Awesome.
Yes.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Love to hear that.
And I think that that's what we need to do is just like make it really easy.
Yes.
For people. I compost as well. I have a backyard, so
Right.
I'm able to do backyard composting.
I was just say, in Arlington, we have, organics composting, curbside for all single-family residents.
Oh.
We have also launched a pilot program where there's on-street for multifamily, apartment residents.
Wonderful.
And so I know one of the challenges that we have if we look at community-wide composting is capacity for processing that. So that I think needs to be taken into consideration with any expansion of organics diversion is just the capacity that will be needed to process all of it.
And has that been a well-received community effort as well?
It has. I think with anything that is done in a community, you have mixed feedback. However, I think a majority of it has been positive, especially amongst those that have chosen to voluntarily use it.
Yeah.
Absolutely love it. We deployed in July, so we're just about 6 or 7 months in, and I think we've been able to divert just over 65,000 pounds of food waste through that on-street program by itself. So
That's amazing. Congratulations. That's really awesome to hear.
that's great.
Wonderful. I will be a little bit cognizant of time here. It is 7:45, so as much as I'm sure you guys could all stay here all night, we'll trap you in DEQ regional office to talk about this. We won't do that. So I will just give you a preview of sort of how we're going to wrap up this discussion. We've sort of framed a lot of these discussions very well, but in case there's any lingering comments or questions on anything we did or did not cover, in terms of community feedback, this is a lot of what we're collecting in the survey. So if you didn't have time to share everything on your mind tonight, you can always continue to respond to these specific questions to that survey or through written comments. So we have a lot of different communication channels, but our email is certainly in one of these many handouts, and you can reach out to us. I also have my personal business cards if you want to continue to have these conversations, and also how we can better support you and talk about incorporating these efforts into the plan. And then we'll move on. This is sort of our big ultimatum question, which a lot has already been pretty comprehensively answered so far. But this is when we talk about these emission reduction measures, we're asking what specific emission reduction measures do you wish were in place in your community or for DEQ to consider in the CCAP? So we talked about a lot of these already. Expanded composting, expanded transportation, or reworking urban planning and land use planning to encourage more walkable and bikeable communities. All of those types of measures that we have summarized sort of in the PCAP and hope to expand upon are very relevant, and we hope to capture regionally as well. So if there's anything else perhaps at this time that you want to share that wasn't covered, we're happy to answer that or listen to that.
that question for me is, and we've got an example, it's 5 miles from my house, and that's a Lorton landfill. And we know, and we have the equipment today to eliminate the emissions from landfills. That landfill has downwind dioxins, furans, and PFAS. There's a plume based on the prevailing wind from that incineration plant. That shouldn't happen. And all three of those things are carcinogenic. That, in my mind, is low-hanging fruit. And we have the equipment, we have the technology to eliminate the emissions from that facility going forward. We can't mine it and get rid of it very easily, but not putting any more in it, any more carbon in it is, in my mind, the low-hanging fruit.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Yes.
One of the themes that came up for me over and over and over again today was ensuring that we meet our Virginia Clean Economy Act goals. And one of the problems I see with the Virginia Clean Economy Act is it does not allow you to get credit for out-of-state green energy. And so for that reason, you know, there's no incentive. And so I think that something needs to change so that happens. And people need to get credit for using green energy, and we don't do that. You know, corporations have major investments to acquire all green energy to support data centers, for example. And when they do that, they should be rewarded, and they don't get a peep of credit for that. And what's going to happen is they're going to stop it. I also just want to say quickly, I think you did a masterful job tonight in terms of managing this meeting. This group had more energy than any other DEQ meeting I've ever been.
Oh, well, thank you so much thank you so much for turning out. This has been, really, really helpful. Was there any other comments amongst it? Yes.
The power of information and storytelling, right? So there's the plan and the emission reduction measures, but there's so much lack of action and support because of the proliferation of just things that are flat out wrong. I'm just shocked by the volume of misinformation and lack of facts that I see all the time. So we'd love to have a narrative that, speaks to the nine benefits of things, because when we do engage in conversation, most people care about clean water and trees and soil. Like for the last couple of years, I'll stop and pass the mic here, but I've learned to greatly appreciate the miracle of soil, right? And the water cycle and things that we just take for granted. It's a beautiful place to live.
Yeah, climate communication is absolutely very important. And I would even say, besides the greenhouse gas inventory, a very solid baseline to this entire exercise. Yeah. Anybody else?
I guess one minor thing is, we had already touched on like construction and green building. I think as we continue to develop, especially in Northern Virginia, there's a lot of buildings that get torn down. And so construction and demolition waste, is a big, emitter in and of itself. And so that should be something that should be considered as well.
Just advocating for stronger regulatory policies in general, requiring polluters to meet strict standards, also industries, to meet stricter standards.
Awesome. Thank you. Anything, Karen?
Maybe two.
Yes.
One is, and kind of going back to what you said about storytelling and kind of myth busting, but a better understanding of some of the processes too, like the permitting process and all of those things. Where are the key engagement touch points? And, transparent, well, not really transparent, but, information on where do you go to find things out before it's too late? Most of the time, the public finds out about stuff, it's 90% done. But the second one was my ultimate wish list, totally big, was the Orange Line extension. That's just big.
Love that. We love to dream big here. That's what we're all about. Yeah.
Great.
Awesome.
Final question. Airports, does that all under the transportation category?
Yeah, absolutely. Eva can maybe talk a little bit about the inventory airports, other than that, they're, yeah. Yeah, they're in there. They are. Yeah. Yes, thank you. Yeah. All right. I'll wrap us up here tonight and share some final resources for us all. So this is sort of our big takeaway question. Is there anything else you'd like DEQ to know, or anything else that we didn't really clarify for you that you require additional clarification on? We can maybe spend 2 or 3 minutes here. Or maybe you're all good and we answered every single one of your questions for tonight, which would be amazing. But if not, and if there are things afterwards as well, as always, you can always email us and reach out. Yes.
So what can we do to help promote or ensure the success of this project? Because I think this is really a very good project. I would like to see it continue and support it in whatever way I could.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing. Yeah, absolutely. So one big way is we're wrapping up these community listening sessions. So we're going to, as mentioned, we're going to Abington and Salem next week. So if you have any contacts there, maybe not, but if you do, sharing the word about that and encouraging in-person or virtual attendance. Other than that, spreading the survey is the biggest thing. So that's our sort of key way to share and capture the input, and that we're going to be sort of analyzing those results for. And so sharing those with your community networks to ensure that multiple diverse voices are heard in that survey would be really critical. Right now it's open until April, but that's sort of more or less an arbitrary deadline. So if we need to extend it for extended feedback, we do have to close it at some point to actually draft the plan, but if there needs to be, a couple of weeks extension, we can do that. And then stay engaged with us. We have our bulletin, so you can subscribe to that, and that will be sort of our mode of communicating with you. Any other engagement opportunities, if we have updated events, and then when we come back in the fall for that public comment period, ensuring that your voices are there. And then my final comment will be that we're really hoping to expand and continue getting input from communities. So if there are specific community-based organizations that are doing really critical work that you think we should know about, and maybe want to talk to us a little bit more and discuss how they can better share their efforts and have that reflected in the plan, we would love to, be a part of those conversations. And we're always open for one-on-one meetings for anybody that is interested in talking about this.
What's the best way to connect with all of you?
Our CPRG email would probably be the best way, because we all receive that. So it's cprg@deq.virginia.gov. And then I can also share my personal one just in case. But yes, we can show that as well.
While we're going there, I would emphasize in terms of your input and making those comments about positive comments about the process and the plan is to, especially during that draft plan public comment period, because there will be many people out there saying that we shouldn't be doing any of this, and that, so any voices that can be out there to combat that, or to show the positive side of, yeah, Virginia's actually doing a climate plan. Maybe it's not gonna happen right away, but at least we're thinking about it.
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
Important. Yeah.
So this is our survey. There is a QR code in your handout if you want to reference it at a later time. It should really only take like 10 to 15 minutes to take if you haven't taken it already. But that's a good way to share your input there. And then this is our email right here, and this is our website. So that is, we updated our website really routinely. Julie is amazing at doing that for us. And so, we have these different engagements, the stakeholder groups. If there's some documents up there that you want to reference or review, let us know. If they're not up there, and we'll do our best to track those down, but that's a good wealth of information on the website. And then we have so many ways to share input, but our final one, optional, but we would love to hear feedback on how tonight went for you. So if this is separate from the CCAP community survey, this is just a post-meeting feedback form. If you want to share what went well, what didn't go well, if you have additional comments that you want us to note, please do fill that out. That's open at any time, and you can just mark which one you attended and share your thoughts with us. We always want to improve how we're conducting these and get the word out more too as well. So with that being said, is there anything else? Let's see online. If any questions there? Well, thank you all.
Thank you guys for the opportunity.
Well, thank you all for coming out. This was really amazing for us. And yeah, please continue to spread the word. And please, if there's any way we can have better support you, please do let us know and keep in touch.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.